As you just heard, The Look of Silence is the companion to my first film, The Act of Killing. But equally, I'd say that The Act of Killing is a companion to The Look of Silence. It's very much the film that I initially set out to make. So it's with great joy that I share this film with you, and I'll be back at the end to take your question.
Kalau kita kaji dulu begini, kita ingin dulu. Wah, udah payah akan kejadian seperti dulu. Pasti akan kejadian.
So it is with immense pleasure that I would like to welcome on stage Joshua Oppenheimer. Joshua, how did you get acquainted with documentary filmmaking? How did you start your own practice of documentary?
I actually went to university to study theoretical physics and cosmology. And because I was interested fundamentally in this most enduring and irresolvable mystery about of why do we exist? What is existence? And I, at some point, inexplicably, while actually visiting a glacier in northern Pakistan when I was 21, decided that the best way to explore these things was as a nonfiction filmmaker. Didn't then go on to study nonfiction. My mentor was the great Yugoslav filmmaker Dusan Makavejev, who combines fiction, or did combine fiction and documentary in his films to the most extraordinary effect. And so I was always interested also, though, in this connection, in the space between fiction and nonfiction.
Cut. Buka. Baby udah bagus, acting Baby udah bagus. Cuman jangan lama kali nangis ya.
To come to your films, we have to also go back to your encounter with Indonesia, to your visit to North Sumatra, and the discovery of the events of 1965 and the shadow they cast on the contemporary lives of people there. Can you remind us again how you encountered these stories?
When I arrived, it was on this Belgian-owned oil palm plantation. I discovered that the Belgian company made the women spray the pesticides and the herbicides because that was an easy job, supposedly. But they didn't give them any protective clothing. And the women were dying of liver failure in their 40s. And when they asked for protective clothing, when I could identify which chemical was killing them, the company responded by hiring Pancasila Youth, the paramilitary group at the center of the act of killing, to threaten and attack the workers, who came to me, some of them crying, but all together saying, we're not going to pursue this. Even though this is a matter of life and death for us, even though some of us will die because of our work, we won't pursue this because in 1965 there was a mass killing here and indeed across Indonesia, and that was the first I heard of it. And our parents and grandparents were killed simply because they were in the National Plantation Workers Union, as were all plantation workers across the country at that time.
Itu definisi kejahatan perang, itu buatan orang yang menang. Saya pemenang, saya mesti bikin juga definisi kejahatan perang.
Kita butuh preman yang melaksanakan jalan Pancasila.
Ini bapaknya PKI ini yang ngajar nih. Untung nggak dapat ke tangan awak dulu, kalau dapat ke tangan awak mati.
Can you tell us something about the way this idea, this notion of reenactment came to you in the act of killing?
I would take pains to say I don't think it's really reenactment, because reenactment is a method that documentary filmmakers use to illustrate a past which is no longer available to be filmed, or to bring participants somehow, almost as in a psychodrama, back into a past. Now that does happen in some of the dramatizations in the act of killing. I would say these films are about the present. I think what they're really doing is acting out present day lies, fantasies, stories, narratives that trivialize what actually happened, all of which the perpetrators have told themselves and imposed on the whole society so that they can live with what they've done.
Belakang saya ini udah ada menyorong lagi nih, menyorong.
Tahanan di sini bisa melihat darahnya.
Bisa. Karena senter itu terus itu berapa puluh senter itu sudah menerangi kami karena ini ada lampu di sini kan.
Jadi Anda sudah tahu bahwa Anda akan dibunuh.
Iya.
Anda melihat darah orang lain.
Iya. Udah tahu dia. Udah ada yang duluan. Udah ada yang duluan di sana kan. Nah inilah memang artinya memang pasrah lah kesudahannya orang itu bagaimanapun perasaannya mungkin saya pun akan bakal mati ya pasrah aja lah.
As in the act of killing, you're setting up a process again, and it's a double-fold process. On the one hand, we see Adi watching clips of those documentaries documentary recordings of acting out and confessions from the perpetrators, and on the other side we have Adi meeting some of these perpetrators and testing their eyesight, which provides also for a very powerful metaphor of vision. I would like you to tell us again how you came up with this process.
I had to find a way of creating intimacy quickly between and trust quickly between Adi and these men. I did expect that the perpetrators would boast and would exhibit the same moral blindness in their boasting while having their eyes tested. So I could imagine these bright red test lenses, it's called a phoropter, that Adi is using, would be this extraordinary image when framing the eyes of these morally blind men telling stories of such horror. And I immediately moved the second camera, and I would shoot these confrontations wherever possible with two cameras because I'm always more interested in capturing the reactions to the words than the words themselves. Cinema is actually a terrible medium for words, and one of the problems, particularly in nonfiction, in documentary, is that people will cut for words.
Orang kampung sekarang Bapak itu takut sama Bapak.
Orang dari 4 orang pun ada. Coba orang tuh tahu. Kalau dia lawan mantan saya ini kata orang tempat semua.
Kalau abangku itu orang yang dipotong juga.
Saya tanya Adi, abang awak itu jadi organisasi di Medan.
Pikir nggak usah, itulah.
Bilang karena ada lah nggak apa-apa.
Milan Kundera, talking about sadness, said, "We cry a first tear because something's really sad. We cry a second tear because we know the whole world is crying the first tear together. And that second tear is the beginning of kitsch. It's the beginning of sentimentality. And the look of silence also, I hope, brings you to a place where you cry a third tear in that final moment where the two men are on the TV giving the thumbs up and the V for victory while posing for snapshots. Where at that point, what's devastating is not just what they've done at the river and the predicament of the survivors, but the moral vacuum in which the escapism that creates the moral vacuum in which perpetrators can consider, or any human being could consider such snapshots a souvenir of a happy day out.
You said that sentimentality is escapism. Now, is that necessarily a bad thing? Because I'm overly sentimental and I am a filmmaker, so that made me feel like my cinema would be kind of escapist. And you also mentioned that third tier, which is actually really beautiful. And do you think that it's our responsibility as filmmakers to make the audience shed that third tier?
If you are sentimental, which I am too, then you must bring your viewer to the third tier to perceive the tragedy of your own sentimentality, which means you also have to look at yourself. Because if you just make sentimental works of escapism, you should leave the cinema and go into soap operas and daytime television.
The man in the act of killing did feel the guilt of what he has done, but then what about forgiveness? What about redemption? Or about reconciliation? Isn't like, can you maybe make a movie about that? Or how he's still alive, how can he live with himself with that guilt maybe later on?
I don't see my role as, I never understood my role as that of a therapist trying to save or redeem or heal anybody. I think that with these kind of wounds, sometimes I'm described, and I always hate it, as opening these wounds and making people look at the wounds. I feel like, again, as I said last night at the end of the Q&A, again and again in the Look of Silence, you hear people say, let the past be past. Survivors are always saying it out of fear, and perpetrators are always saying it as a threat, which means the past isn't past. The wounds are not healed over. They're open, they're oozing, they're festering, and people are looking away from them out of fear.
Thank you so much, Joshua.
اتكلم عن حاجات انا فعلا اول مره اسمع عنها، اثر فيا جدا جدا وخلاني على الاقل عايز ادور شويه على اصل القصه وارجع ابحث شويه واعرف التفاصيل ايه اللي حصل.
I think I was in shock as each perpetrator started sharing their story and their reasoning behind it, and I think I'm gonna need several more hours after the screening ended to just kind of grapple with what it is that I saw.
He's quite the narrator, I think, you know, leaving aside the visuals, but the way he constructs everything and how he thinks it, I think that definitely his speech after the film brought even more insight into what happened.